there is no one recipe of how to innovate for complexity, but definitely one ingredient is mindfulness and self-reflection, and another one for me is critical thinking a lot, like critically analyzing what we're doing, and but not just from an output point of view, also from the process, and connect that to how we feel and why our mind, our brain has suggested to do that specific action.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Mattia Vettorello as we take a communication perspective on leveraging artificial intelligence as a co-thinker. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Mattia Vettorello. Mattia and I met at the RSD 13 conference in 2024 put on by the Systemic Design Association, where he hosted a workshop on an AI tool called the Perspective Circle, which is designed to be a co-thinker in the decision-making process for organizations to consider all of the stakeholders involved in decisions. And that was the spark of this conversation. You're going to hear more from us about that today. Mattia regularly publishes thought leadership and speaks at international conferences on themes of anticipatory innovation, ecosystem business models, and using AI as a co-thinker. Without further ado, let's begin our conversation with Mattia. Hello, Mattia. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you, Abbie. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I'm really excited to get to talk to you and pick your brain and learn from each other some more. As always, I want to start our conversation with the question, how are we arriving? I'll give you a second to think about that and answer for myself first. And I want to share some of the larger context of this conversation, which is that why it's even happening in the first place. And that's that I met you at, people will not be surprised to hear, I keep referencing it, the Relating Systems Thinking and Design Conference in Norway this past year, particularly during the workshop part of the conference, which I just thought was so rich. I obviously love opportunity to be interactive and have a dialogue more than a monologue. So that was great for me. And one of those sessions was led by you on the Perspective Circle, an AI tool that you described as a co-thinker. And in the workshop, we got to explore that. And that was a really neat experience for me because generally I would consider myself someone that's a lot more cautious about AI. And with that, I have to say pretty largely uninformed. Like I think most people are, maybe have strong opinions on it, but there's not a lot of nuance in the conversation. And so I think we had this experience in your workshop of playing with this tool. And I asked, how do we keep this as, using the language you used, a co-thinker rather than becoming the decision maker, kind of stepping into any kind of role beyond what it should be that maybe gets into dangerous territory. And your response was, in my memory, something to the effect of, well, it matters how we interact with it. It's up to us kind of to keep it in this role. And that for me immediately was like, I need to know more about that. And so that to me is the start of this conversation today. And I think we're going to talk, more than about just AI and the specific experience we had. But this feels like a really cool opportunity for me is how I'm arriving to it, for us to add a little nuance and a little complexity to a conversation that people are having right now or are not having, but have opinions on. So, assuming maybe the majority of people are like me and are not using this tool or are not in a world or a business world where this is like a huge conversation going on where they can understand all the nuances of what it looks like for us to imagine and create our futures together, AI being one of those tools. But I think there's a lot more for us to talk about. So that's kind of what I'm bringing. That's the context I'm bringing to this conversation. That was a lot, but Mattia, how are you arriving today?
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like ages ago because now I'm speaking from Dubai, and at that time I was living in Norway, in Oslo, and moving and relocating is always an hassle to change place, get acquainted to the new place, and also change weather drastically. From -22 to +45.
Right.
But on the AI and the aspect of core thinking, using AI as a core thinker, and that day I was presenting the tool, the Perspective Circle, which I co-developed with Gabriele Rossani, one of my ex colleague and dear friend. Now I find myself using more and more the tool, not the Perspective Circle on its own, but the AI tool and then suite of tools to really help me challenge my own way of thinking and use it as a way of supporting and co-creating the asset, because one of the value I see in AI is really helping enhance and expand my knowledge, since AI is being used and educated with a lot of with the word database. So that's something I'm using more and more. And since we met the first time in Oslo, I started to use it more and more. But at the same time, we keep hearing what's the benefit of AI from a human perspective, where it is from the use of resources to enable and empower AI and servers to speed out information in a very fast pace. But at the same time, also what the impact on human and talent in the workforce. And I was reading actually an article, one of my newsletter that I'm subscribed to this morning, about no more a double sword, but a three-way sword
Okay.
of the use of AI, and how that is critique from one way and then is enhanced from another way. But then people are left without jobs because of AI,
Mm-hmm.
but then we have other people that praise AI because it's facilitating and the development of content. But at the same time, I see also a standardization of content, because then people think of AI the first way to get output from their questions. But then back to your point and where we met, and I know the conversation we also had in Oslo after the workshop is what's about our critical thinking in critically analyzing, evaluating, and further questioning what the AI machine is giving to us, and then back to a first principle way of checking the problem here is how much is that output dependent on the quality of questions and prompt that we put in to the machine? Because that's something I'm struggling myself when I use the tool, is about what and where do I want to get with the tool, and how can I break down that kind of journey and provide input or prompt to the machine that then gives me back something from which I can build on top. Because otherwise, we get sometimes lost in machine being free
Mm-hmm.
to kind of roam around its own knowledge and then bringing out output that are not really connected to what we're trying to achieve in the last. So I'm trying actually to approach it in a structured way. So then if I need to plug out something, and then I can plug in something else in the context. But I mean, I stopped there. I think we have much more to discuss and unpack it. So yeah, but yeah, lovely to see you again, Abby, after a long time in Oslo. So
Yeah, that's all great context. And I think we are definitely going to dive into that. To divert from the topic a little bit, but to give us some more context, though, I wonder if you would introduce yourself. And specifically, I want to know what's the kind of story you tell about yourself, and what context feels important for you for us to know about you as we go into this conversation today.
yeah, for sure. So one thing that I tell myself and I tell others about myself when I'm presenting myself in new situation is that I usually go and explore the world by foot. And then I meet people on the way, and I travel solo and unsupported in Iceland, in Tasmania, in Nepal, in California, in Norway as well. A couple I've done it in duo with friends because they asked me to come along. But that's something that it's something that is like my signature, my professional mark that I bring into business because the way you program or you design an adventure like this and the way that you can manage uncertainty and ambiguity and I kind of try to bring that also in the business world. So that's something that I would say is an added value to myself for others.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very cool place to start. And I would be interested to hear more specifically, like what you feel like you learned from doing that kind of travel. And I'm immediately thinking about my own experience that after I graduated from university, my partner and I traveled in Europe for 6 months. And the ambiguity, the uncertainty that you just named was definitely the biggest teacher of that time. But also after doing that, I was like, I can do anything. I just figured out my life for 6 months, kind of living out of a suitcase and just having new experience after new experience. So I definitely think that's something incredibly valuable, like you said. So maybe that's a cool place for us to start of what specifically are you bringing from those experiences?
Absolutely. What you said about, figuring out how to survive, that has different degrees to each one is actually how do I ratio my food to make sure that, I have enough calories for to go through the day, but at the same time, I don't run out of food because, I still have 27 days more to go. Especially I'm referring to my first solo trip in Iceland. And so that's one part about managing resources and organizing before actually going into the adventure. What I need to bring and what I really need to. So not actually bringing everything because you need a lot, but at the same time you can't carry a lot because that every inches or so no every kilos or grams is on your shoulder, so you need to carry that for the entire trip. So that's one part. Another one is like planning, making sure that things are there, but at the same time, and it's basically maybe goes to touch upon something that we will talk later about the innovation system roadmap, but is about planning for the unexpected. And so you basically plan because if something happened then you can change, but without a plan you can't, it takes time to plan, and so you
Mhm.
kind of mitigate and anticipate the different possibilities. So those are a couple of things. But then also when I'm adventuring in the middle of nowhere, one of the most important things I learn is actually be aware and conscious of myself in the situation. So,
Mhm.
different feelings, how my body works, how I do react to circumstances. And the other aspect is that I attempt to not bring stereotypes or assumptions into or expectations into any conversations, rather than just see and face things as they come, because otherwise we especially in business, there are many things that happen that could affect our mood or ourselves interacting with others, and so sometimes people and my team as well might have a bad day, but and so it's about to understand where things come from and then trying to look the positive side on those and the opportunity and not look at the challenges, and so challenges are faced as fact or taken as fact because they happen, and so how can we move on from there?
Yeah, yeah, that's great perspective. And I should say that my traveling was not quite like yours. I'm not rationing food, so there's a whole other level to that of your experience. But what mirrors my experience is that balance between what you can plan for and emergence is the word that I would use from a communication perspective. And that's been a huge lesson for me. And I think it's so interesting because I have this language, again, from a communication perspective, around creating better social worlds. And I want to try to shift my thinking around that because when I hear that and I ask a question of like, how are we working towards better social worlds? How are we moving towards better social worlds? How are we creating better social worlds? It feels like this far off thing. But I want to be asking, what's the better social world of this moment? But also, I do want those better social worlds in the future. So there is this back and forth of the process and just being present to the process in the now and trusting that the outcome will be there, but you still are working towards a certain outcome. So it's a little bit of a,
Trade-off.
exactly. And so there's like, you could come at it from these different perspectives, because I think it is important for us to look to the future and say, what do we want the future to look like? What do we want to create in the future, and use our imagination to do that. And also, it's not, well, when we get there, then we'll do that. It's what are we creating right now that will get us there then? And so I'm curious to know about your perspective on that kind of planning and emergence balance, but also the now and the future balance, I guess.
Absolutely. And maybe you phrase it better than me. I'm pretty sure you phrase it better than me by just using one word, emergence. That's the things,
Mhm.
about being comfortable with emergence as well.
Right.
And so then all the matter of planning, that's to increase your ability and your comfort of the ambiguous, unknown emergent of different facts and facets of the thing that you're doing at that point in time. And that's also because I did the expedition in Iceland in 2015, and then I also done my PhD afterwards. And that's where I started connecting my passion for strategic foresight and future thinking and this aspect of emergence as well.
Mm.
And that trade-off is not something easy to it's not something easy to talk about as well,
Yeah.
because we can't touch that future, it's something far away as well. So what are we trading off in between? I mean, what's it's basically the unknown, and the idea of planning for it is maybe more about of a process and the way of thinking, and think in a agile way, and think about, but so maybe even not also just thinking, but structuring the process in a way that is flexible, adaptable,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so it kind of welcome that flexibility of changing aspects. Again, the conversation is high level here because we don't have an example, but the idea of having something flexible that you can act quickly, that could be whatever is that container, or where you have the content that you can change.
As you're talking, I'm thinking like it's a little paradoxical, but in one sense,
It
I
is.
think the best way to be a steward, a good steward of the future, is to be mindful in the present. And that's what I like about, and I think what maybe originally struck me about the workshop that you did in the perspective circle, which I would love for you to describe so people have context for that. But again, this language of co-thinking, and that's about the process, and that's about the quality of our interacting and co-creating together, and the kind of trusting or knowing that that's the kind of cause and effect, that if you have that quality of the co-thinking, and you can use this tool to be thinking about all these different perspectives and really being critical and creative in your thinking in the process, and you pay attention to that, then again, you're kind of being a good steward of the future by bringing that quality of presence, I would say, to the now.
Yeah, and one thing that to me is important to mention, as you were saying, this aspect of the core thinking is also how we approach the use of the tool, or we approach the future, or we approach innovation in other conversation. But the idea of approaching the tool itself, and the technology that is AI that we've been talking about, and the perspective circle is an AI-enabled tool to support people in decision making, and can understanding and balancing trade-off to support the final decision. Again, the way you approach the tool that is back to your questions that we ended up the workshop on that day in Oslo about how can we ensure that we use the tool as a co-thinker rather than taking for granted the output that it give us. It's about how we approach that and how we put ourselves in a situation to use the tool to augment ourselves rather than do the job for ourselves. And nowadays that way of approaching should also be taught in a university, for example, or in different school. And because then we see the new generation just going inside the business world with that idea of approaching and using the tool as an enabler rather than as a output creator. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And as I'm thinking about your world of things and what you named of future thinking and foresight, when you're in that world of future thinking and foresight, what does it look like to stay present to the process of things if your whole world is about looking forward?
That's a PhD question, I guess.
Yeah, maybe I went a little deeper there. I guess I'm curious about the role of imagination in looking forward to the future and kind of why it matters that we do look forward in the same way or in a tangential way to why it also matters for us to be present now.
It's a good point that you're talking about and bringing up imagination. I was reading a very good book that I have it next to me actually, which is called From What Is to What If by Rob Hopkins, and talks about imagination. And he makes a statement that I quite agree with him about, that we are in a lack of imagination in nowadays. I know people disagree with that, and some other agrees. I mean, which is good, we have opinion and we can discuss openly.
Yeah.
But the idea that brings back to this lack of imagination is also those tools that we mentioned and we're talking about today that standardize the output. Okay, so luckily, until proven contrary, AI is unable to take those capabilities from us, like lateral thinking, critical thinking, emotional intelligence as well, imagination, one of those, and also kind of being creative. Because of the database is that, the database that the machine uses is something that is already there and kind of it's good to have combining and reshuffling those things, okay? But the human, the capability of the human imagination is something to create, to combine and then create something different from it, which I believe imagination is still one of our key differentiator from machine. And how you use that to explore the future and bring it back, that helped us also to kind of have hope and ambition to put ourselves in a position as a society, as an individual, as and as a team and in a project, to kind of imagine ourselves in a future state, and then how we can get to that future state, but also from a motivational and interpersonal point of view, how we can motivate ourselves, how can we create that kind of energy to go there and be disciplined to reach that goal that we put in 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah. The kind of language that's coming to me that's interesting is to think about innovation and progress, and that I think it's very easy for us to think that progress is a linear thing and that any innovation, any kind of new thing is good and is progress. And so I think we're in a moment right now that's really interesting for that conversation, for us to say, and again, everything I'm doing, I'm coming at from this communication perspective. And so one of the tools within the CMM theory that I use is called the hierarchy model. And it's about contexts, plural, and naming that there's many forces that are kind of shaping how we might be showing up to a conversation or someone else or a moment. And it's, not necessarily like, okay, name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which context the most to the least, because that's, maybe not the value of it is being able to name the exact order, but there is a value, I think, in naming what's the highest level context, what's emerging to the top, what is driving and motivating our decisions right now. And so I think as we look at AI, as we look to the future, and we think about, I think it's important for us to think about, I don't know that people are being as mindful of this right now when the kind of like tidal wave maybe of quote unquote progress feels so strong, for us to pause and think, be like, well, what is our highest level context? Because if it is, like you just said, this interpersonal aspect, this relational aspect, that we're really valuing our own imaginations and our own abilities to co-create together, how would that, if that's our highest level context, how would we act into interacting with AI? How would we act into our family lives, our work lives, every area of our life? It goes beyond just AI. But again, thinking about how are we acting in the moment to moment based on what we've been able to name, which I think is such a powerful tool in communication that gives us, power, even a small amount, naming what we value and what matters to us and what are, that's the practice of saying better social worlds, is just having an opportunity, I think, to name what you think that better is and then figure out how you might work towards that.
Absolutely, and just by naming, there is the effort of acknowledging it,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's it. Then there
Mm-hmm.
is the creation or the contemplation of something that could be new or maybe not new but brought in a new situation, and then can help people even visualizing it. And so then we connect imagination, something abstract, to then the visualization of a new concept, of a new future in this way, or of a new tool, and then we start all the creation and development of around that concept and that community of future and that ambition. And then we talk about motivation, and then we talk about putting effort in achieving that
Mm-hmm.
motivation, that goal, that ambition. And AI can also help in understanding how to achieve something in this case.
Mm-hmm.
We discussed this during the workshop and in other conversation that we had afterwards. I'm approaching this as a expert user, but not an expert in the technology
Sure.
itself. And a good friend of mine, also an old colleague of mine, Todor, always said that the AI that we use now is the most stupid one because the technology advances so quickly and so also exponentially that we will achieve much better output and outcome in the future. And if even if we check what AI we had when we talk about when we met during the workshop in Oslo, and the one that we have now, I think one of the main brands release few version of the model, and others did the same. And so it's really improving and becoming even more thoughtful of the outcome, because it's requiring more time to think and reason through before offering an output to the prompt. It will be interesting to see where we'll be heading towards in the next years.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing back to that distinction of maybe an expert user of this tool, but not, the one behind the scenes designing it, and naming how fast this technology is developing. And so I think also not being the expert designer and not being an expert user at all, what I hope to bring to the conversation is, as we think about how quickly this technology is evolving, what do we humans need to be doing to evolve with it if we're in the camp of AI is here to stay, it's not going anywhere? But I think what we're starting to bring into the conversation, and we don't have all the answers for this, do this, and then, AI won't ever be a problem. It'll stay as a tool. It's we don't have the exact answers to say, do this, and then, check mark, you're good. But the things that I think it's important for people to start thinking about, and that, again, all I can offer is my own curiosity, my own process of doing this for myself, is thinking about that mindfulness, the kind of ethics or the context, that highest level of context. What do I value as I'm interacting with this tool or as I'm looking towards my future, our futures? So the kind of mindfulness and the responsibility, I think, to be mindful co-thinkers
Totally.
together with each other, together with whatever tools are available to us. So yeah, I'm thinking about, again, communication, interpersonal communication. I'm so interested in the relationships, not just between people, but between things. And so I'm curious about some language we've already touched on, language I know you use, what you see as the intersection between this mindfulness, this may be responsibility, I'm naming that as well there, between innovation and progress and complexity. I think that's something we haven't touched on yet that I'm curious to hear, because again, this conference that we first interacted with was relating systems thinking and design. And so much of the conversation we were having was about the complexity of systems and navigating complexity. And so, yeah, what's that relationship? What's that intersection for you between mindfulness, innovation, and this complexity, specifically as we look towards creating our futures?
So mindfulness, complexity, and innovation. You mentioned something interesting that I wrote down about, our responsibility to be mindful and also, so mindful, but we went on, but that three words that you said about mindfulness and responsibility towards also the use of the technology, that was quite powerful, because then how can we bring mindfulness in a world that is just going quickly forward, and especially in the industry that I work, it's very fast paced, and is how can we find mindfulness? How can we find a space for self-reflection? How can we find a space for creativity, imagination as well? When AI is also just powering that quickness, because faster output and faster outcome. I do personally go swimming or running. Sport is my mindfulness. I have a good friend that I met here since I moved to Dubai, that he just do kind of meditate. That is his way of be and practice mindfulness. So then brings for me the idea of complexity that you mentioned, the connection of us within the system and the system within other systems. That another thing that I talk about is ecosystem of ecosystem, because a system for me is container within a system, but then there is actually ecosystem within ecosystem, because there is a layer of higher complexity, at least for me, when we're talking about ecosystem of ecosystem, because if you look at the cycle of water in nature, you can have ecosystem within that bigger ecosystem, and so on, which brings then to innovation. How can we innovate in this complex and chaotic system as well? Because if we take the Cunevin framework from Dave Snowden, we also have the chaotic realm, or dimension or domain or quadrant, about that be ready for emergent, and that we touched upon before. There is no one recipe of how to innovate for complexity, but definitely one ingredient is mindfulness and self-reflection, and another one for me is critical thinking, a lot, like critically analyzing what we're doing, and but not just from an output point of view, also from the process, and connect that to how we feel and why our mind, our brain has decided, suggested to do that specific action. That brings back to AI as well, how we evaluate, and what we do with the output from AI is up to us. We don't need to take that for for the absolute truth. So we can always challenge that. That's some of the thinking that come about mindfulness, complexity, innovation, which then brings to your point about what's our responsibility in this, how can we be responsible towards those three aspects and more for the social impact that we want to create or we aim to create, which then open up another conversation about which kind of word, which kind of communication we're using to convey these ones, because we should not be too academic. I use the word academic because that's always referred to when something is not clear. That's always too academic.
Yeah.
But how can we make this accessible to everyone?
As you're talking, I'm going back to that language of co-thinking in my original question of how do we keep AI as a co-thinker in that role? And I think the kind of flip side of that question is how do we keep ourselves as co-thinkers and not diminish our own role, like you said, by giving AI or a tool like that all this power and not acknowledging our own ability to think critically or creatively or use our imagination. And so I'm just thinking about co-thinking and also co-learning or collective learning is language that I also picked up at the RSD 13 conference. That's really stuck with me and is shaping how I do this podcast too. I want to think of it like collective learning. It's my podcast, I'm the host, and I want to learn from you, but I also hope, I can contribute to the conversation and we can learn together with the language that I offer from a communication perspective. And I'm just thinking about the process of learning and kind of my own life, how I learn, I guess. And maybe I would almost even name it as like experimenting, is thinking about process and thinking about practice. That as I do think back on like traveling, which I said is something I love to do, but thinking about that very long period of time where I traveled, that was like the second time that I had ever traveled internationally and was obviously a very long trip. And there were things that we had planned and there were things that we didn't. So there'd be like moments where it's like, well, I don't know where we're staying next week, or I don't know how we're getting there yet. And I definitely consider myself a natural planner more so. And so it was a practice in learning to step into this emergence, to this mystery, to the chaotic unknown, like you said. And I just feel like I learned so much about myself in that experience. And then this past year, when I traveled to Norway for this conference, I specifically was like truly experimenting or practicing. I feel like that I was like, I've learned a lot about myself in the experiences I've had. Let me try out some of it. I don't want to be so stressed all the time about needing to have a plan. I also don't want to be stressed about not having a plan. So I was trying to like play with these different ways of being almost because I wanted to be able to be present. And so I knew that there were maybe a couple barriers, things that could stand in the way of that one feeling like so beholden to having a plan. But also, if I didn't have the plan, then stress could arise from the unknown of it all. And so it was really for me a practice in kind of trying on these different ways of being to say, what if I just trust that things will work out to an extent? I, still had some plans, but what if I trust that I'll get where I want to go or that I'll get to do everything I wanted to do? And that was just like, I think it's all you can do is practice to kind of learn something new, to try on new ways of being. And so that is, maybe a kind of tangential story to exactly what we're talking about. But I'm just thinking about, my own self as a human person, learning and growing and creating and making new ways of being for myself. So I don't know. I'm curious maybe if you have any stories coming to mind too about any of that in your own life.
You mentioned a couple of words here.
A lot of words.
While you were talking about all this, one, I will start with one, but then I focus more on the second one. I just want to, reinforce your word of diminishing ourselves to the machine. That we have if we approach our relationship with machine in a co-thinking, co-creation way, that's where ourselves we put in a situation where we empower ourselves,
Right.
and we can do more. If we if if we need something and we just go to the last episode or first episode, that is the GPT, because we want that quickly, and then we copy and paste it, and that's where we definitely diminish ourselves and our know-how on the topic.
Yeah.
But the one that I want to focus more is experimenting, which also, how do you experiment with the machine? But experimenting is one of the foundational, the grounding pillars of design thinking. Experimenting, testing, creating things quickly, and see which, if we open more to ourselves, and also the story that you brought up about when traveling without having much or many expectation, or just like traveling, experiencing, and in that way of experimenting, one thing that I challenge myself every time I do something is put out there to myself and ask questions: what do I want to learn from a specific situation? Okay, even going into this meeting with you, this call with you, is like, okay, what's something that I want to learn more is about how I feel, again, being in front of a camera, how I feel about some questions that, again, I'm not a technology expert of AI, so we can't expand that much on that, but again, we can always go into that conversation to some extent. So how does my body react to some of those? Okay. Or even when I go running, because that's the way I enjoy getting my motivation higher, or swimming. Again, what's one thing that I can check and test while doing that specific activity? And to me, that's also experimentation and testing how I do things, and then bring back to the way we approach life challenges and opportunities as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just coming back to, again, design as something that kind of the world of systemic design that was kind of first introduced to at this conference. I didn't have a big background in, and I think there's a lot of ways to design. There's a lot of things to design. And so it's been really interesting for me to start thinking about the kind of, overlapping circles, Venn diagram of design and communication, and thinking about how we're designing our interactions, or designing our social worlds, even, so that we act into them with mindfulness and with compassion and with curiosity. And I don't exactly know how I want to say this, but I just think we have such an opportunity to create the kind of container that we want for our social worlds, for our ecosystems, is the language that you used, so that we can thrive within them. I think, like you talked about, like empowering ourselves. I think this is the one way, at least, to do that, is to remind ourselves that we get to design, or kind of set the tone almost, of our social worlds. And there are certainly things outside of our control. I'm not saying, you have complete power, so everything's your responsibility or your fault. But there's certainly ways in our interpersonal relationships, in our work worlds, in our communities, in our social worlds, to affect change in the way that we decide to show up, and how that helps other people understand how they can show up. And so, like in our conversation right now, for me, what I hope to model, because I want to experience this for myself and because I want other people to know it too, is that the value is in the conversation itself and the exploration we're doing. The value is not, here's a podcast where Mattia and Abbie give you the answers to everything, because we just can't do that. And all I can hope is that people are thinking and learning, and using their imaginations, and thinking about stories for themselves, and thinking about what they want to create and design. And so, again, I think maybe this is circling back to an earlier point of the designing, the being a good steward of the future, of creating what I want to create for the future, starts with the tone I'm setting now the way I'm acting into my social world so that we create patterns in relationships that feel good and are generative and are founded in curiosity and collective learning.
Yes, and on your acting, I like that you mentioned acting, because also wording, like the words, the communication can be act, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I started noticing for the last, so it started everything in 2009 actually, when I went in Australia for the first time after high school. I was approached by the cashier at supermarket with, "Hey, how are you?" You know, like genuine, "How are you?" You know, this
Mm-hmm.
person really wants to know how I was, and then I replied back. You know, but that was no way of saying from the country I'm from Italy. You know, because it's different way of of
Mm-hmm.
welcoming people. And since then, I started saying, seeing and noticing and observing how people ask, "How are you?" and also how people respond to "How are you?" And again, I haven't done a scientific research about that. It's just
Sure,
like my
sure.
experience around it.
Yeah.
So, but the idea is that this Hawaii became so ubiquitous that it's been ingrained the way we say hi,
Mm-hmm.
and so we don't really mean "How are you?" I'm just saying, "Hey, Abby, how are you?" But then I will just, to some extent, and then you answer me, "I'm all good," "I'm
Mm-hmm.
fine." But and so then how can we act
Mm.
that or that we really want to, how can we make sure that I'm really asking you how are you, but more importantly, how can I make sure that when I ask you how are you, or paraphrase that in some other way, you really know that I'm really care about you and I
Mm-hmm.
really want to know how are you, because then from there we can
Yeah.
again motivation, and we talk about our responsibility, our mindfulness, our imagination. I mean, if you are in not if you're not 100%, maybe we focus on something else or on other stuff. So I start noticing how are you has been acted
Mm-hmm.
if you can act on the words, but it's quite interesting though.
Yeah, right. That would be creating an entirely different pattern, which would create an entirely different understanding of a social world. If you say, well, what if we actually cared how each other were doing? And what would it take to get that out of people or help people to interact in this new kind of way when we're so used to this pattern that you've named? I think that's a great example.
Yeah, it's something, I mean, I think that could be another another PhD, maybe an anthropological one.
Right, right, right.
The thing that I was like mapping and sketching on the post-it here is that we touch upon so many topics that are very much interconnected,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, there is no a solution
Right.
or a recipe of doing something. And the more question actually we provide to, or kind of help your audience to get to come up with, honestly, the better. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's also how we can learn by provoking questions in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think the language that's sticking with me from what you shared is you described yourself as an observer, and you're saying, I'm not doing any kind of real research, but just my own observations. And then I just described my own experience as an experiment. And I think that is, again, not that we can really put like a nice tidy bow on this and wrap it up and be like, here's the answer. But again, returning to my original question of how do we interact with this tool, and maybe what kind of was behind that was a kind of how do we interact with each other too, to create mindfully the kind of futures we want, is a little bit of seeing ourselves as like I said, just reference yourself as an observer. I just kind of returned to this language because I was pulling up this document that I made very early on in making the podcast that was just kind of the key points that I could write down about the coordinated management of meaning theory, so that I could kind of like have it pulled up and remember to like use these words or ask these questions so that I can keep this theory ingrained in the podcast. And I was just referencing back to that the other day, and some language that I saw there was participant observer. And that's such an important part of a communication perspective that's very different than some other communication theories, where it's acknowledging that you're both of these things in every moment, and you have the power to be. You are a participant, you're an active participant who is co-creating the social worlds. You have choices, you can be mindful, and at the same time, you have the ability to kind of step back, zoom out, and observe what's going on. And so I think that's maybe kind of what I feel good about, like, offering people today, is seeing themselves as participant observers, and something I want to do for myself, to say, I can do my own research in my own life. I can do my own experimenting. I can participate and observe and learn. And that's how you're going to learn and grow.
I love it how you phrase it. Yeah, it's it's really, you put it very nicely. The participant observer.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think that's maybe feels important to me too, because it feels like a shift. I don't know that most people see themselves in that way,
Yeah.
see themselves as having the power to create their social worlds.
Absolutely, and it's it's even more than creating. First of all, is observing. Honestly, observing
Right.
what's running us. So there
Mm-hmm.
was this fantastic meme, and I mean, I do love my phone. I mean, it's a very great device to connect
Uh-huh.
with people, and I mean, if technology didn't advance to this point, we would not even be able here
Yeah.
to talk. I mean, the idea to consciously detach from technology. Again, that's why my mindfulness is swimming, running.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even listening to music because I really want to focus on my breath and focus on the sport, the activity. But there was this fantastic
Mm-hmm.
meme about someone on the train. I think it was someone on the train just being on their phone, and the city going up on fire. I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a bit of an extreme. But again, how much are we observing when we go and do
Yeah.
stuff? Even when we walk outside the door of our building, that we've been doing that for 50, 15, 20, 30, whatever years, and we might have noticed never something that was just there. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like observation is quite interesting, but we need to actively do that. It's not just things
Mm-hmm.
come fast. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I'm over here being like, you're a participant, don't forget to participate. But I'm taking for granted that exactly what you said, but how much are we observing? Because there's a lot of learning to do around that as well. So thank you for that perspective, because I was making an assumption there. Um, okay, as we wrap up, we've covered so much, really beautiful conversation. What else do you want to share with people? A story, an idea about anything that we've talked about today? What do you want to leave us with?
Maybe with an offer to just go out and observe. We started, just go and do something that feels different. And I won't suggest going in the middle of Iceland hiking, but just, yeah, do and observe.
Mm-hmm.
That's something interesting. And one of the tool or the method that I do love the most in my work is like a service safari, which is basically kind of taking part actively to a service or a product or an experience that you are researching on, and really put yourself in the shoes of the person going through that experience, and then you observe from there how that service, product, or or policy could be improved. But definitely go out and observe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great, Mattia. Thanks. I think that's a great thing to leave people with. So we'll leave them with that. And the language I like to leave always with is better social worlds, and to have people be considering for themselves how this conversation, everything we touched on today, which I won't try to list because it's simply too many things, how is that all a part of creating better social worlds, how we might engage in that, participate in that, and how we might observe that as well. So thanks, Mattia, for your time and your perspective. I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you, Abby. Likewise.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.